jsem hrozně moc rád, že jste dneska si udělali čas na tady ten online křest. Snažím se další a další lidi sem vpustit. Celá ta událost bude probíhat v angličtině, doufám, že to pochopíte. Samozřejmě proto, že tu máme dva super vzácné hosty a dva autory tady té knížky Spekulativní kresba, opravdu 2011 až 2014. A já teda už přepnu do angličtiny, ve který samozřejmě můžeme vést nějaký vzájemný dialog. So it's incredible pleasure to actually have you here, both of you, Armen and Andreas, since we already knew each other for years, and this translation was not just another book that we are trying to bring into Czech Republic, and it was some sort of an intellectual, meeting and a dialogue. And to explain just a very little bit from the history, me and Katarína, I greet her also. We just started, yeah. We started like a small but ambitious edition of books in Czech. The first book was actually coming from me, should have some sequels, and this is actually a second book in those book series.
Yes, but the first book that we started to talk, when we started to talk about the book edition, it was like something like the beginning of our cooperation. So it's kind of very important also for our book edition and our cooperation with Václav.
Yeah. First of all, we need to thank the Foundation for Contemporary Art, which helped us to kick in with this book project and the publishing as a sort of publishing platform. I really don't want to introduce this evening and to really give you the space, but still it's the edition is committed to somehow bridge the gap between academic discourse and wider public audiences. To put it as simply as possible, we strive to democratize the cultural and intellectual capital that we already have and generate in contemporary art and contemporary thinking. That's what we are dedicated to with the entire edition, and that's why we even picked speculative drawing, because that's like a incredibly neat take on this way of transversing or like getting out of the regular philosophical production, and of course trying to find another, for instance, a visual language in terms of speculations and speculation as a program, etc. So just to maybe introduce you as authors of the book. The book has been originally published in 2014. It is, let's say, some of 15 other smaller books and collaborations and thinkings in progress that are there, grasped there, or that are somehow encapsulated there, not only in text but also in the drawing itself. And as far as I know, you're preparing German and Dutch edition, which will include 4 new chapters. So maybe we will, get to know more about these renewals. And without further ado, I would just give you the space to actually show us what is going on in between this kind of writing and drawing, in between your thinking of both of you.
Maybe before you start, there is also one more important person to mention, and it is Josefem Řídkým, who did quite a bit of translation of the book. So we are greeting him as well.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Well, it's me talking in this couple. So it's up to me to say thanks to really everyone involved. This has been a long ongoing project, which is very dear to me because I really love this book. I think it's for sure the most beautiful book that I did. I can say that because I didn't do it. All the beauty comes from Andreas. There's been other translations, like a Spanish one, and as you said, Václav, some are in the making. I thought what could be fun, or what could be true, or what could make sense is that simply Andreas and me start working on something that we are already late working on, namely adding a few chapters to this book. As you said, Václav, it consists of like 15 monographies and edited books, and each of them is like one chapter is dedicated to one of these books. And we decided together with the German and Dutch publisher to add add four or five more chapters. So what I thought is just I brief Andreas and tell him a few things about these 4 books, so we could think about how to structure them in a way. So instead of doing a kind of meta commentary about like how we work, I mean, there's time for questions afterwards, maybe 10 or 20 minutes. I just say a few things about the upcoming books, if that's okay for everyone, including Andreas. Is that okay?
I will follow you. Yes.
Yeah. Well, following is already, maybe I should say one thing that really triggered my how we started working together, because it's an argument against the following idea. We started working. Actually, we started working on a book cover, and then I got an invitation to work to give a talk in an art context. I felt like uncomfortable with, and I said, like, Andreas, why don't you join me? You know, we do something performative that you draw while I speak, so I'm less afraid. He said fine, and there was one striking experience that I had, namely that someone in the audience at the time said, I really like what you did, and so on. It's just sometimes Andreas was a bit too quick, you know, and he was ahead of what you were saying. And it was really striking because I felt that, first of all, Andreas didn't know what I was about to say. And secondly, the way we cooperate and the way we work together is not by him understanding everything, and for sure not illustrating it, you know. So and that started like us thinking about like what it means to collaborate, to communicate in a way that disrupts the usual usually implied chronological order of things. Namely, first of all is the logos, is the word, and then the illustrator illustrates what has already been thought. And that's a bit the methodology of the book. So maybe from the many different topics that are treated in the books, that are the chapters are consisting of, I take this temporal dimension and tell you a few things, Andreas, about the recent books that I wrote, so that you know what's ahead of you. Like, one is a book called Mimification, which is something you don't need to start working on it, because do you remember who it was that we did a chapter, or we did an extra publication for? Slovak journal.
X&O was the name.
Yeah. So that's a book that after something that felt like a longer time where I didn't have time to write, I spent 10 days in Miami, and already when I was sitting in a plane and being offline for like 10 hours or so, I couldn't stop like writing, and this whole trip, which was a kind of writing adventure as well, it implied like me trying to systematize in a certain way some thoughts I developed before, and together with other people on a new temporality that we called a time complex, a post-contemporary time complex, and in different to the speculative drawing book, where thinking about time is mainly language based, and there are several chapters on literature, and a book I wrote with Anke Henning on present tense novels, that is novels that are written in the present tense, in a tense that is normally seen as impossible to narrate in. The mimification book is one that follows time philosophical questions, or tense philosophical questions, rather on the level of technology. Now, I don't want to enter in this too much, but the key thought is somehow that we're living in a time that is no longer organized in a chronological way, but more and more we are governed by the future, given the derivative financial industry, and given preemptive wars, preemptive personalities that we are, all the things algorithms know about us. So that is a book that that I wrote as a kind of diary of a 10 days trip to a city that is very alien to me, and that I couldn't understand at all, and that somehow forced me to write and also think about technologies that are somehow beyond my grasp as a classically critically trained European philosopher. So that is going to be one extra chapter that I wrote since the publication, a book that I wrote since the publication of Speculative Drawing. Then there's a book that is called Metaphysics of Time, where obviously I speak about similar questions, but in a more well, in a less kind of diary kind of way. And the whole speculative drawing book is based on a research project that's called Speculative Poetics. The website is currently a bit sick, I think, so I cannot recommend you to have a look at it. But it's a project that was done with Anke Henning, and many other people also participated. So that is one aspect that is very important, that I always try to collaborate with other people. And in order to somehow finish this project of speculative drawing, of speculative poetics, I decided to write one final book with Anke that became like more and more complicated. Because one thing that we so far only addressed in terms of in theoretical terms, namely questions of deixis, questions of who's writing and who's the addressee. Is an I writing? Are we writing? Are we addressing a certain you? Are we addressing an anonymous audience? Are we addressing an objective scientific community? So who's the sender? Who's the receiver? These are questions that we only addressed in a technical and didactical and linguistic and philosophical sense. In this book, which is called, which became two books, 1+1 and 1-1. And the subtitle, or it's also dealing a lot with like questions of feminism. And the question we addressed there was, what does it mean to write together, to collaborate together, and what does it mean to override someone else, and what does it mean if two different genders, so to say, are writing. And we've somehow felt that this could not be done anymore like we did in the past, by simply saying we, as one often does also, even if one is just a singular person writing and addressing an objective audience. So I think, Andreas, I think it would be nice, like we did with some of the chapters for the speculative drawing book that has been translated now into Czech, if the briefing for for the 2 books that I did with Anke is done by Anke, because every time you get a different briefing, it also has an impact on the drawings. They look differently. And what I find fascinating, it's and maybe some of you will ask questions and you see how Andreas reacts is already the wrong word, but like how it influences him. What I find very fascinating is if someone else talks about a certain text, I can see like their brains somehow and how their brains work in Andreas' drawings. So I would say this is something you should rather do with Anke. As it's mainly me talking now, Andreas, you cannot say no, or I hope you won't say no, but like this would save me also a lot of time. So these are the other. This is the 3rd book, and the last book also continues this question of. Again, there's so many motives and so many topics, but I just want to focus on 2, namely the temporal one and let's say the personal one, namely who's writing and for whom is one writing. So the last book that we decided with the German Dutch publisher to add is a book that I wrote only for my son. So I'm not sure whether I'm going to publish it. I just did 1 public reading, but it's my son is just like 2 years old now, and he's obviously super smart, but like obviously he can't read, so he won't be able to read this book presumably the next 15 years or so. It doesn't make sense for him to read it, let's say now. So, but he might read it, or it might only make sense to him once he's like my age. And I hope he's living for a very long time. That means he has a look at it before he's dying when he's 80 or so. The reason I'm saying that is like what really triggered my interest is like, what happens if I die tomorrow? It's the kind of things that I always have, especially also like having a small kid. But also, what does it mean to write for someone who and only for someone with someone in mind who might read this book when he's 80 years old? That means in the year 2100. What kind of time frames are we talking about, and what is relevant for someone to know in 20 years time? What does it mean not to write to someone who's living now, but rather tell things that are maybe not that interesting for my contemporaries, but should be known? You know, what does it mean to become the archaeologist of my time? What does it mean to look into the present, like from the future, from my son reading this book in 20 years time? What does it mean to think about myself from that? So I hope, Andreas, you see that it could be interesting that we produce a kind of second introduction, a kind of introduction that comes before the new chapters, and then we could tell a bit this story of how some technical questions like on deixis. Deictica are, for those who don't know, are words or like I, here, you, now, that have no meaning, no intrinsic meaning. They only make sense in the context. When I say I, it's me. When Andreas says I, it's him. When I say tomorrow, it depends on when I say tomorrow, and all these kind of things. So all these things that I wrote about in the past on a philosophical or a linguistic level have now, and the latest example, the book To My Son, is a very concrete you, and it's a very, very concrete I that is writing. So they have become very concrete. Or the question about speculative temporality, or a time complex as being governed by the future, again, has become for me very concrete, because I cannot but think about myself from let's say my son starting to think about me very critically, I imagine, in 20 years time, or in 40 years time, or mourning me for sure in 80 years time, and so on. So that is something that I think could be interesting. And Andreas, to even have something like a little, even though we decided to continue with like separate chapters, it could be interesting to have a certain motive going through the 4 new books. Whereas in the past, the 15 chapters are mostly very independent, because also the topics are very independent. I don't know, there's a book on accelerationism, there's one on speculative realism, then there's a book on the present tense novel, and then there's one on language ontology. So they do not necessarily produce a kind of narration. No, I don't want to imply that we should have a kind of chronology there, but it's just a suggestion. As usual with Andreas, all my bad, especially one bad habit of mine, namely talking too much, like gets like blown out like over proportion, because that's what I'm supposed to do. So it's even worse than usually. So I do not even know. But Andreas, you get my point, that maybe it makes sense not to address everything that is addressed in these 4 books, but rather focus on 1 or 2 or 3 red threads or like motives, and show the development of a certain thought figure, like from where are we writing and who's writing, and from where are we writing is both a spatial but also a temporal question, and who's writing. So who's writing from when could be a kind of kernel for these 4 chapters.
Well, I get your point, and usually it is necessary for me to hear the author speak. So I think speaking with Anke, as you said, will give me a different approach. She describes things differently as all the other authors did so far. I'm mostly interested in the kids' book, so to say, what you have to tell your kid, because I do it differently. I'm probably not bringing these 2 worlds together. For you, it is probably, or what I assume or what I expect, is that you bring your world to your kid, and I rather try to accompany my kid right now, because I don't think that I can really tell things in words. That's your language. My language is this, so I need to tell them something with the drawings, and that's what I need to do now. So every night or every day, or so that's why I'm very curious when I will start reading your text. Then let's see.
I mean, you can also listen to it. There will be a one time streaming on Monday and on Thursday. I send you the link. But by the way, I'm now in Zurich and I'm not with all my books, so I do not have the English version with me. But the Czech version arrived, and it's really, from all my books, for sure, it's his favorite book, you know. And it's haunting me, because he continues to say und das, you know, like with like manically, like and this, and I'm supposed to explain what they mean, these drawings, and which is of course the only thing I do not want to do. It made me start thinking about like this project again, and why I enjoyed it so much and trusted so much in a certain element of not understanding. You know, like one thing I mentioned in the introduction of the book is how much I love this etymological observation by Roberto Esposito, saying that both community and this community of like working together with Andreas and also with others, but also communication and many others, immunity and so on, they all go back to one kernel, that is munus. And as opposed to what one would think, munus does not mean what we share, like basically me and Andreas, of course, we share a lot of like cultural background and upbringing and so on. But rather Munus is to be seen as a gap, as something that is lacking, something that needs to be bridged. And for of course for Esposito, this is something that is important to think of a different kind of political, to develop a different political theory or a different kind of democratic politics. And it would be interesting to talk about this with you, Katarina, and Václav, but the thing you mentioned about a democratic publishing that shares, you know. So what is there to be shared, you know? So Munus, if Munus means not a political assemblage, not a society where those people hang out together that share something like real Germans and real Czech and so on, but what Esposito is of course thinking of is like a community that is a collective of people that differ from each other. And for me, I mean, that's politically totally valid, but for me it's always like nearly like a poetical or an intellectual imperative. What does it mean to work with someone and always being aware and stressing it even that there is a fundamental gap. What I said about like writing with Anke is not that with every book we write, we become closer to each other and we agree about more things. On the contrary, you know, it's more and more finding out like how much we are different. And I just mentioned the gender aspect, but there's many other things. And also with Andreas, now I come back to the point that when my little son is asking me about these drawings and I cannot really explain him, and this reminded me of like how much I enjoyed it and I trusted this making sense. So that there's an element of not Andreas illustrating and not me understanding better what I do by these illustrations or any of that, but rather an encounter of an impossibility to equal something visual and something conceptual, and this not in the sense of a kind of aesthetical admiration of a je ne sais quoi, of something that cannot be grasped because it's so beautiful or something, but it's a very precise practice. And I finish with that. What I said before, I'm really fascinated to see what Andreas makes of the book I wrote with Anke by Anke describing it, because it makes me understand better how Anke thinks. And not in the sense of, now I know what she means, but rather like how she thinks, as if the brain is a muscle and there's a certain peristaltic, and I see like how she concludes, like how she comes from A via B to C, whereas I would go a totally different way, and that's why I end up with C plus or a C minus or so. So that's also, I think, how I explain to myself the way that Andreas understands what I say, and I understand what he's drawing. Not in the sense of explaining it, but rather understanding the mode of inferences, of deductions, or so. So it's there's a kind of grammatical way of Andreas' drawings that interests me. That is not following thoughts, but rather like breaking it down to something like not even a molecule, but an atom of a book, which he then develops in his own way. So it's a kind of chemical process or a nano. I mean, these are all metaphors that are maybe sloppy, but yeah. I think we are. I saw that Andreas wrote like 1830, and that could mean it's 6:30, and something that now, because great, now I can really we haven't worked together for a long time, but one thing we did in the past was to trying really to get rid of this me just talking and him just illustrating. I got a bit out of training, because normally it's also about me reacting to what I see, which I totally failed this time, because I'm, hence the green screen, I'm traveling and I'm in a very weird surroundings. So I was more focused on somehow speaking for a bit. But given that it's half time, maybe it's time for some questions by YouTube, but or maybe also by Andreas, or like, I don't know how many people are listening and watching.
There is about 38 of us in total. And maybe before we can actually ask people to, pose the questions, either via chat or via the Q&A. Maybe I still have one question. Katarína, do you wanna be first to ask?
Oh, please go ahead.
Well, what I still wonder about quite often is to what extent speculation is itself some sort of program, some sort of platform, some sort of maybe even a hashtag that somehow fosters a way of thinking, a way of reimagining some sort of future. Am I like too bold in this assumption, or can you think of speculation as this sort of platform? And if so, has its promise actually changed since 2014?
You mean speculation or speculative poetics, or what do you mean?
Well, for me, generally, it's rather a speculation as a concept that somehow sparked something in philosophy. Yeah. But I of course, I totally know that you have a concept of speculative poetics, and you foster this sort of like project that is oriented towards, let's say, work with language, etc. And you can expand on that too, actually.
No, I mean, I don't. I mean, there's the history of philosophy kind of response that would have to say something about a pseudo clash and lots of misunderstandings between a new speculative turn and speculative realism versus a kind of postmodern language orientated philosophy that speculative poetics actually try to overcome. But I mean, these are that's maybe not so important in this context. So if I just think about like speculation, then I would go really back to what Hegel says about speculation. So there's two interesting things. He speaks about the predicative sentence and a speculative sentence, and what a speculative sentence really consists of is one where the subject somehow drowns in the rest of the sentence, or the verb, so there's a kind of constant transformation where the fixed categories and the dominance of the subject somehow drifts away. That is one aspect. And the other thing is about the speculative philosopher. And for him, a speculative philosopher is something, it's not easy to read Hegel, and I'm sure already his contemporaries might have mentioned it to him. But his point is really to say something very blunt, namely, you only become a philosopher. You only you only understand speculative philosopher by becoming a speculative philosophical writer yourself. So there's a transformation from reading into writing that is also, well, it's also very important, or it was very key for what we for speculative poetics as a research platform. The translations we did and the work we did, and also the collaborations and how we collaborated. But I would say these two things are hopefully an indication, at least, to why what's relevant about speculation, which is so often used as a kind of, it's just like a hashtag, in a negative sense. So the one thing is it's a different, a speculative sentence is something different than a predicative sentence, because there's an inner movement and change within. And reading and writing, you can only read and understand a speculative proposition, a speculative utterance, by transforming it, by it transforming you and making you productive and becoming a speculative philosopher. So this is my interpretation of Hegel's blunt. Well, if you're too stupid to understand, I mean, you will not understand if it doesn't make you productive yourself. Is that somehow an answer?
Yeah, definitely. Maybe Katarína?
Okay, I may ask Andreas, because Armen, you said that you don't understand Andreas' drawing sometimes, and my question to Andreas is if or how well do you understand Armen when he's speaking, and how important is to understand the meaning of what he says when you're drawing?
I was afraid of this question, but I would never get or would never try to get into any discussion with words, or speaking about speculative philosophy, speculative realism, speculative poetics, whatever. The only thing that I can offer is to translate into these thoughts into practice as good as I can. So I guess I have a bit more of clue of this whole thing, which has a pretty cool name and which has now placed a label on the way of my drawings, because it somehow fitted through this collaboration. It was a long process. Through this process, solutions evolved over the years. But basically, I guess the spectator right now, 38 people, can watch how I try to make sense of whatever comes on my table right now. So for some people, it might make intense sense because they can fill a gap between the thing Armen says, between your questions and what the people see right now. And I think that's the most important thing that I can ask for, or the best thing that I can ask for, that people's minds are triggered by the drawings themselves. And I guess that's why I'm not really interested in pure illustration, because usually illustration in the classical sense gives you a pretty clear idea of what is going on. So I really love scientific illustrations, because they can visually explain in a better way, or for me more accessible way, of how things work. With thinking, it is, I guess, something different, because it's a process. So here you saw a few steps, and the audience now has to make sense of two things: the things that they hear and the things that they see, and sometimes they link. So basically, it is happening here. Something is linked between I'm lost, you can see that, or it is written down, or it's in the air, or it was spoken, but some people can take something with them right now. So I guess one thing is that it's not a way of better understanding the contents, so to say, the things that are said, but that it's opening a space in your head. And I guess I like to not be too precise, but still keep a gap open so that the audience can start thinking. And that's what I understand under the name of speculative drawing, to keep these things open. And in practice, it's basically mainly Armen, because it's 300 something pages and it's getting more and more. But it's a way of thinking that is my usual drawing practice, to come to what the audience also wants, precise illustrations. But this is the fun part.
I mean, I don't have answers here, but it's just some elements. It's also very different what we do when we do something live. And now this is a meta event where we're launching a book of something we did not do live. So a lot of the drawings come out of things we also did live. You know, so these are very different processes, and that's one thing. The second thing I want to say is, it's not understanding doesn't mean not knowing, doesn't mean not being precise, not mean not producing an evidence. Me not commenting on what Andreas does is part of me. I never is wrong, but like maybe every 5 years I write something about an artist. I refuse to write about literature, about books, about and so on. So at the same time, in a better world, you know, we would be able to really work together on a more regular basis and actually reproduce me answering again Václav's question or your question, and then see like how my thoughts are pushed in a different direction by not being with half of my like brain or with my eyes focused on like how Andreas continues something and what I expect to come next, and then he starts something. I think like, oh, I guess that's where he's going. All this while I'm continuing to talk, you know. So there is understanding all of a sudden very much changes its meaning when obviously there's a mutual influence that is very different than the usual one between an illustrator illustrating someone's thoughts, or a critical an art critic speaking about a great graphic designer or so. But yeah.
And how do you feel when translators are entering this process, this kind of like intimate communication between you two?
As I can't read it, I don't know. It's very often that I have to work for articles in other languages, and there's or it belongs to my working practice to align with Google Translate. And so with English and German, it works very well. With languages that aren't probably not giving enough input, so that the automatic translation learns very, very fast, like Norwegian. I think it is always fixing gaps within these translations. So I guess every communication process keeps open little gaps, little misunderstandings. And I don't mind, because we had this huge discussion about who can translate a certain poem the last weeks. And there were more political reasons involved. So I guess I'm very much used to accepting gaps. I can't compare what is written in Spekulativní kresba right now, only what Google Translate tells me, and I have the slight doubt that I'm missing a few points, but I trust that the translators did a proper job. But I'm not the one who corrects anything, and I think these misunderstandings or this openness that might be presented to me by Google Translate, for example, I embrace that, because it's a little glitch that offers a couple of opportunities or triggers my thoughts. What can be the sense? So
We are. I mean, when we don't think about understanding and in terms of copying and illustrating and a kind of adequation, a mimesis of something that is already there, we are within a very different terrain and a very different concept of truth. And also, of course, a very different temporality. The reality is not already there, and then it must be copied like as close as possible. You know, there's a beautiful thing that I quote in the intro of the book when Derrida speaks about the drawing or the painting, the drawing of the blind. You know. The theme of the drawing of the blind is the hand. For the hand ventures forth, it precipitates, rushes ahead, certainly, but this time in place of the head, as if to precede, prepare, and protect it. So the hand is sometimes faster and before the head. And maybe Andreas, if you can, because it also makes a difference between reading and listening. Maybe on Thursday you can really listen to the stream of me reading the book to my son, because the first chapter is on intimacy, and you mentioned, Katarína, that we have an intimate way of working together. Now, for me, intimacy is very interesting because the book for my son Andreas is, you know, it's the first year. It's the year before language, and I also wanted to stop before, like there's a kind of more semantic communication. So intimacy is based, I think, on really two people. It's hard to be intimate, I think, 7 people. You know, it's also very different than love, which is full of declarations and hysterical demands and so on. It's not, so it's before language, and it's very much based on gestures, yeah, on things you do with your hands. You communicate by very different means. And this is something I was very interested. So there's one chapter just on intimacy, and it could be interesting as a kind of methodological. I mean, I you know, the things that you ask, Katarína, are for me rather like, okay, so how do I put this in my briefing next time I speak with Andreas about my book, you know, and this chapter on intimacy, and then we will find out. Because what we do now is just like taking notes for maybe something to happen, you know. So, and this is also, we spoke about speculation, but this is the poetics, or the poetics part. It is, are we able to find a kind of situation of working together where something is actually produced and not found out as if it was already there? So do Andreas and me, will we be able to make sense of your question, that so we retroactively find out like what we did? So that's why you put some dirt in there, in the sense of like something that we cannot like digest right now. You know, we cannot answer all this. I mean, we can somehow waffle around. I've got some training as a philosopher, and I can quote Derrida because I quickly put it in front of me, and maybe it sounds for 19 of the 38 people like a profound answer or so, and maybe for others just as a shallow charlatanry. But in the end, it's just we're gaining time for actually something to maybe happen. So and I hope to give you just glimpses of like why it's fascinating to think about the things that one is really haunted by, for example, intimacy. You know, so Andreas is interested more in the book for my son. I'm interested in intimacy. You're interested in like our intimate collaboration. So now it gets interesting. So the next thing I think is like, you know what? I mean, why don't you join us when we work on this chapter of the next book? You know, it's you know, that's how we worked really in the past, and how this book actually happened. I bought a coffee. I met someone who came early, started talking with Andreas. Andreas took notes. I said, like, this looks very different than when I talked about this book. And then this other, you know, and so this is a bit what the spirit that I wanted to reproduce in a way, you know. So this should be part of yet another working process, and that is, I think, the far better book launch than just like me waffling up only about the past, which I did far too much anyhow.
Thank you. These were really beautiful answers. Thank you.
Maybe if I could return to your question about the translation, as I realized that not everyone is used to read drawings. It is a proper language. People are used to IKEA drawings because people grew up with that. There's a part in education to see technical drawings and read them. Scientific drawings, you can read them. But drawings that leave uncertainties makes you feel uncomfortable. But I realized that, Katarína, when you had to translate the book, you came up with all these questions. What does this mean? What does that mean? What is limes? For me, it was so clear that it was this delimiting system of frontier defense in England, and I assumed that it might have a different meaning in your language. But through these questions, I realized that you were actually reading all the drawings again. And we came across a couple of mistakes, more than we already collected, because the first book was although it had 4 years of production, the whole editing process was pretty much in a rush, or for me at least, overwhelmingly big. So I always had the feeling, well, we should have had a second, a third, a fourth look on it. But this process showed that people are used to correct the writing, not the drawing. And you don't react on drawings and decipher it and ask, well, shouldn't it be A instead of B, what I wrote, because you 10 pages before you mentioned a B for this and that, and so it's really difficult to introduce drawing as a language to the reader, and you probably have to concentrate a lot.
Sorry. That was a bit the goal, one of the goals we had, to have a book where the hierarchies and the normal natural, pseudo-natural order between language and image are disrupted, and this has to be done and not just talked about. So how do you force people to read drawings and make them stop reading texts as in a kind of chronology? I mean, we're still looking for the perfect reader. I mean, there's also not a kind of review that really has a kind of explanation what we did. I still don't know how to read this book properly. Maybe translating is the only. That's why it's so beautiful every time it gets translated. There's a Russian translation in the making, but every time it's a very difficult process, and not just because it's a difficult book or so. It's very demanding. Maybe we should have made this very different, and we should have just asked question to you, and what does it mean to translate? What does it mean to work on the book? And not us being the experts. Somehow I feel like now 5 minutes to 7, we failed. It would have been the right approach.
Maybe then we need to translate the different, or the next book, another one.
Maybe one more thing. There was someone mentioning that I would be ahead of what Armen says. It might be so because I follow thoughts and I might be a little bit quicker, but it might be just the perception of someone who actually sees and interprets things differently. But what I totally believe in is, for example, coincidence. When you mentioned the book about your kid today, Armen, came to my mind that I spoke with a guy today who mentioned a book by Chester Brown, who is pretty well known for a series of books about how a child perceives its childhood without language, and the author invents a language, and it's basically, or it seems to be, I only saw a few images this afternoon. He seems to invent some words, but what I also saw was that he reacted with the drawing. So the surrounding doesn't have a structure. It's not a chair, but it's something blobbly which goes together with the carpet, because there are no words for that. And that's what I realized when I was doing drawings for my kids, that this learning of language has always to do with separating it from our language, or separating it from the objects. And so it might be interesting for you to look up Chester Brown. That's what I can mention now.
And there's one who's writing about transgenics in endocrinology, and then there's one I never liked your comic book. I guess it's the first one. I will download it and have a look. I mean, we have 2 minutes for questions. That's I think very polite and totally sufficient.
Does anybody from the audience has a question? Maybe just in the meantime, I hope we still have some time for the questions from the audience. I'm still thinking about the drawing, you know, or about responding to the drawing, or about how it feels like to be, you know, involved in this kind of thinking drawing process. And it's hard. It definitely demands like a different view on the very process of thinking. But what I constantly think of is, and what you, Armen, actually mentioned quite a few times, is that you're basically, or one of your main focuses is who's writing, you know, the problem of deixis. Like it's and the last book, it's not a book about your son, it's book to, you know, to your son, dedicated in some way, like defined by not by the subject matter, but by the deixis, or by who is writing to who. And apparently incredibly interesting, even philosophical problem. But if I somehow look into those drawings, I see some tension, because what I still, the impression that I always have, and particularly today, is that actually there's no one in particular talking, no one in particular, you know, thinking, because the thinking process in those drawings does seem to me always to inhere some sort of, you know, social body, some sort of it's raised or generated by connections and not by individuals. So that's for me like an interesting observation.
But tension could be seen as, I mean, I'm not sure whether it's a tension. It's on the surface, it's a contradiction, you know. But I would say me addressing a very, very concrete person, namely my son, who doesn't exist, is the opposite of addressing a concrete person. It's a way of addressing a social body, but maybe not a social body, but it's a similar desire as addressing, like, not just my fellow philosopher friends who, even if they're good leftists, they have a certain cultural, social background. You know, I allude to what you said about the democratic kind of spirit of publishing, a democratic spirit of communication. So even in me and in my privileged cultural position, writing to my son as a very concrete individual and a very in his privileged position is nurtured by a similar desire, I would say. So in that sense, I would say there is a tension, but I would locate it somewhere else, namely in yet again failing, of course, to achieve it. Or never completely achieving it. Now, I'm not a romanticist of failure, but I would see the tension somewhere else and not where you locate it, where it would simply be a self-misunderstanding or a kind of paradox or contradiction. Do I address your? Because it's a very, very fine observation, and it's very important. It's yeah.
Of course, like tension is like very positively charged concept for me. So of course I meant constructive, but of course it's tickling. You know, there is a tension. You know, but it's a constructive tension. But thank you. We have a question, and that question even concerns the translation directly. DL asks, what was the process behind the translation of the texts, parts, handwritings of the book? Do you want to react, Katarína?
I can start with the reaction and you can help me then. Well, first we had the question if to translate them into Czech, but then like this question was decided like right away that we want to translate the text part, and yes, we need to mention David Bem, who helped with rewriting, with lettering into Czech language. So this is very big thanks. And what was the process? Well, a translation of these parts was maybe like a big part of the job. So it was, I guess, quite difficult. And I don't know, like maybe you can continue, Václav.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess we learned a lot, you know, in the process. Because, I thought like, okay, I'm translating at least one book a year, so it's not, you know, it's the way it is. But then when we started with this book, we constantly ran into problems in terms of like the workflow, you know, and in terms of course us being free of us translators, and I'm actually, you know, saying hi to Josef, who is here actually and may help me with answering. And so it was translated by me, Katarína, and Josef, and we always needed to get back to, particularly in respect to those drawings, and how do we even approach you know, those short lines and concepts that are intertwined with the drawings themselves, because sometimes there was a figurative meaning behind that deserved a translation. Sometimes we needed to retain the reference, which was made to a specific, you know, point of a specific philosopher. And so I think we were really running in a circle. maybe it was not just a complication, but maybe it was the way how you know, thinking is perplexed, or how it's getting engaged when it's rather drawn or like made tangible.
Now I'm wondering why we never thought of translating pictures into Czech. We were thinking only about translation of the text parts, but then, as Andreas, you asked this question, I was thinking, okay, is Andreas translating or drawing differently when he draws in English and when he draws in German? I don't know that. And is there like a language in the drawing? If you were thinking in Czech language, would you draw differently?
Yeah, I would have problems to understand, as I don't speak it, so I can only speak about English or maybe Norwegian, but I think it's not the language itself that has an impact, the voice of the author. And I think after having done books since 2003, basically for poets, I can react pretty well on the way of people use language. So some is more constructed, some is very associative, movements within the language. I can feel that, and these things have impact usually on let's say not only the visual ideas packed within one of my languages, but I changed the languages, the language in drawings, or it is like being a DJ in this case. So I use a different kind of music to express a certain idea. But these drawings, for example, are pretty basic because I have to be very fast right now to think, speak, and understand, and to try to make any sense. So without this pressure being watched, it would make, or the drawings would already look different. And I think changing the style of a drawing is like changing the music according to the language. It's not about the language itself, but how somebody speaks, or what is the construction behind the language. And that's what I can probably only really judge by in my mother tongue. But it works pretty well in Norwegian already. So I don't know which muse helps me there, but the reactions tell me I'm not that bad in it.
Which brings us back to, you know, the understanding question. What does it mean to understand? You know, you might not get some nuances about the content of a certain philosophical argument, but you might get a sense really of attention within the argument. You might get the beauty of logical deduction. Think of Deleuze writing about the fifth chapter of Spinoza's Ethics, the fastness, you know, the speed of it. So there are so many things about thinking and thought that are often only seen as overtones of the logical argument, but that in fact go much deeper. And that is something that one can learn. So it's a beautiful thing to have this double alienation, reading my texts in drawings that I don't understand and in Czech that I don't understand, you know. So that's a beautiful confrontation. But I'm also not needed. No, I mean I have very boring duties. There can be more questions and drawing answers, right? If I drop out.
Yes.
Yeah, speed is a good thing to speak about, because I guess speed constructs or helps to construct content, because your brain needs to work very, very fast. You see that I'm sweating a bit because of the speed. The paper is reacting. You see that I fill the pages, and as far as I see, there were a couple of nice ideas in it, but it's only in retrospect probably to see which kind of sense they make and where to start reacting in a lower pace or in slow pace again. But this is like throwing all thoughts up in the air and so this won't end up in any book, I guess, but it's there for maybe trying to get a few more ideas soon, without speed.
I don't know if you, Armen, are in some limited, time management. So if you feel like that was the time and that you have other obligations, we will definitely understand. On the other hand, I would like to say or introduce once more Josef, and maybe he can actually get engaged with the question concerning the translation or with other topics.
Well, good evening to everyone once more, and once again, it's a very pleasure to meet you both, gentlemen, Armen and Andreas. So finally,
nice to meet you.
Personally, I knew your drawings and your text, so finally I see who you are actually in real. And well, as for translation, the whole job was pretty tedious, in fact, and surprisingly gruesome. And when I was first approached by Václav and asked whether I would, jump the train and help them with translation, and I just browsed the book and saw, okay, it's just pictures. That should be a quick summer job. It'll be fun. And then I realized it was anything but this. So and actually the written part, it was, as the book is structured, there's always 2 pages, 2-3 pages of continuous text, and then there's 20 pages of drawings. So I was thinking that's quite okay to translate. And eventually translating the text was the easiest part actually. And because once I entered the pictures, I realized it wasn't just dialogue between me and the author of the text, but it was more dialogue, or even more. There were pictures and quotations and from books that with their own discourses and their own language and vocabulary. So I had to deep down into those books and get access to them and acquire their vocabulary and so on. So each chapter was translating completely different book, but eventually I found the rhythm, and sometimes the drawings were helping me translating those the texts, because the texts sometimes are pretty enigmatic or really fragmentary and so on. So actually eventually I found the relations or the rhythm between the text and the pictures, so that was quite helpful. And yeah, it was surprisingly difficult to handle this dialogue between the illustrations, text, and books, and Armen's commentary and Andreas's drawing. So, but yeah, so that's for my experience, I'd say.
Thank you for your work on that. I can imagine that it's hard.
But it was fun eventually. On the other hand, I realized some pictures, some illustrations, like the part on poetics, the chapter on poetics, where you draw Roman Jakobson's, poetics, all the stuff, this conception of language and communication. I realized this could be used, in classes. It shows pretty efficiently how it is. You don't even have to, eventually you don't have to read the Jakobson itself, linguistics and poetics. You just show the pictures, and I think it goes like this. Yeah, the last chapter on accelerationism, it's also, I always had a bit difficulty to understand the concept, so this really made things a little bit more clear for me. I just don't want to oversimplify it, but I think there's really some value in the pictures, the power of schematism and all this. So they can be. So I saw some real value. I mean, even inclined to use it in my classes one day. So thanks for your work anyway.
Good luck with that. I try to find Jakobsen right now. Wasn't it this one? Wasn't it? Anyhow, yeah.
It's a few pages further, I guess.
Maybe there's still some.
It was a good briefing.
Some questions from the audience? I still think about the drawings in the process of like watching you work, and one maybe entirely simple obvious observation is that concerning the speed and the drawing and the thinking is that when you draw in particular, you always somehow tend to have the idea of the finished image, you know, immediately. And in this way, the drawing is really more up to speed with thinking. I mean, more than language even, because in language, you have less control over the overall structure of the, you know, thought that you're gonna just now, you know, outplay. But in drawing, you actually can have the control over the entire image, and in that way, I think, you know, I think like I feel, of course, I'm not a drawer, but I feel like drawing is more up to speed with thinking than actual, you know, speech and language.
I guess live drawing gives an unprecise impression of that, as here my brain plays ping pong between entertainment, to find a thought, one thought, or to find a row of thoughts or a set of thoughts that in the end make sense on an A4 sheet of paper. When I try to understand things, I try to make I try to find a visual concept to understand it and to be correct. If I don't match to be correct, then I might not be that interested, or I make a mistake, or I'm more interested in the visual appearance maybe, and leave the correctness or the didactical part of that away if I fall in love of the aesthetics of a drawing. So here it is basically a high-speed jump from very simple form to simple form. If it would be theory, like Ben's theory, and reading each sentence and try to make sense out of things that I don't understand, or try to add things, then I'm totally not sure. So I think that pairs quite well with speed of thinking. But I think I'm not a very slow drawer. Yeah. So it is
there's also a danger in or a trap in thinking about understanding. Sorry, coming back to this understanding thing, in terms of speed, because it implies that an image understands a thought when it's in synchronous, right? But the simple idea of a blind drawing and the drawing being before the head or before the thought is not just that it's quicker, but it disrupts the question of synchrony. So a concept that is very central in the whole book is asynchrony, because of the present tense novel and so on. So I think we have to it forces us to think about translation and drawing and collaborating beyond questions of like let's try to be in the same speed. So that means we are synchronous to each other and we understand each other in our different media, so to say. So that I just wanted to indicate there's a danger in thinking about this in terms of speed. It partly makes sense. I think I even brought it up, but it's also misleading at a certain point, because asynchrony so I spoke about this munus and a communication based on a fundamental gap in understanding. So this an analog concept in temporal terms would be asynchrony. Asynchrony really being something different than someone being a bit slower and then having I have to wait a bit because Andreas is a bit slow now and he doesn't get it, and then he catches up. Obviously this is not what's happening here,
What I might need to mention, there are standards in understanding, or that you usually try to meet when you want to make someone understand things. Stereotypes, and as an artist or as a drawing person, you try to avoid stereotypes or transform them as long as there are no stereotypes anymore. And that's probably the hard thing. Another thing, we didn't speak about that at all, is how to draw a person. If you draw a person, for example, like that, it's always a male person by perception, because I would have to choose certain attributes to make it visible as a female person, which doesn't make sense, because it's simply a simplified version. But you see a political aspect in drawing. If you want to make sure it is a general person, then you try to avoid to give any attributes. But if it's no attribute that specifies it, it is by perception or by stereotype the male person. It's always something that where I didn't find a proper solution yet. That's something to struggle with maybe the next topic that Armen offers. Still there?
Thank you for that reaction. I don't know if the audience is not very too much today. Maybe still we have a place or time for one last question. So somebody wants to ask something, but in particular Andreas and Armen. Maybe Josef or Katarína, if you want to ask.
Yeah, maybe actually I'd like to ask you two gentlemen, first of all, once again, props for the whole book and the concept, really like refreshing in the field of academic discourse, or if we even consider it like as academic book. And I just wanted to ask, you've mentioned before that you plan to like expand the book, but besides expanding speculative drawing, I just wanted to ask, like, what's your next plans in like for this year? Like what's your project you are currently working on?
Armen, are you there?
Yeah, I'm there.
Otherwise, I can simply tell. So the Dutch Dutch publishing house will do the Dutch translation and the German version of it. It will be added by 4 new chapters. If the question was directed to this kind of speculative drawing, otherwise it's hundreds of projects that use the same kind of thinking for movies or for other books. And although it's Corona, there are more jobs than ever right now, or they simply take longer. That's
I'm trying to reduce the 100 projects to 2 or 3 or 1. I still have to do 20 more events until beginning of June for the Volksbühne, where I do a theory series, and I wanna try out working in a different rhythm, in a different speed, Yeah, again, it's not, there's no point of talking about like content, but rather like what would be the next writing project, which always means for me not simply a problem or concept or an observation, but like a way of, before I start writing, I need to know like how do I write it and whom to and how. So I tried out very many different things. So now I'm trying to write a more popular book with a popular publisher and some advance money and an audience that is very different to the one, let's say an avant-garde niche cultural one. And so that's what I'm currently interested in, and what would come after, you know. And I think for this it's necessary to reduce the amount of projects, because one might do a lot of things, but it's oneself and the audience one is addressing is basically always the same, even though it's not the same people, it's not the same topic. So that would be my answer. I try to answer along the lines and the concepts and the thoughts and the phenomena we addressed in the last 1.5 hours. And sorry for dropping in and out, but I really have childcare.
I think we all totally understand. I think yeah, we kind of exhausted the time that we planned for, but still, maybe if there is one question from the audience, the last question. Doesn't seem so. Or any I don't know, punchline, closing remarks.
I really hope that we meet up and in person and actually have the time to continue this communication in the sense of trying out answering some of the questions, listen to it again on the way to Prague, and then trying to find out how we can follow up the question of like, what is an intimate collaboration between whoever, you know, and can this book help answering these kind of questions? Can it be made productive for that, you know? So that's what I would like to do, you know.
Definitely, we too. We would love to have you here in person, both of you, and I think the occasion will pop out.
I hope so. It would
and
be
really narrow it down to some very minor questions that only us 40, if we're still 40, people will understand initially, you know. Intimacy in collaboration, you know, it's like, it sounds like a kitschy topic, but like, you know, you gotta really narrow something down and then find a kind of testing ground, like it's a laboratory, it's an experiment, and you need to really know what you're trying to test out. Otherwise you have 15 different molecules like doing something, you know. So that would be fascinating, and maybe we find out that this experiment can only work if we also get the Spanish translator, because it needs two. Otherwise we're misled by some constructions in Czech. I make something up, you know. So what is it really to find the right laboratory experimental order of things in order to address one question, to test something out and falsify a hypothesis, you know, with the unique means and tools that Andreas allows. So that would be really nice. But yeah, so let's hope we
also
can
mentioned Russian translations, so we can add also the Russian translators from Russian.
Yeah,
would be
it
really
would be good
nice.
to have one translation where we understand the language. But like, it's going to be exciting to have this book translated into our native language, Andreas, right? That's also that's also
going to be done finally.
Yeah. I have to say goodbye and really thanks a lot. This makes me beforehand we were joking and Václav said he misses traveling and I said, or I wanted to say, I really don't, but like this is one of the rare occasions where I do. So I hope we see each other in real life soon.
Likewise.
Thank you so much
you.
for today, for the book, for the work.
No, thank you. We did that 7 years ago. You did the work.
Thank you very much again.
Thank you. So
Thank you. And maybe just as an official ending, you can always buy for the audience. You can buy this book at least in the Foundation for Contemporary Art near Strossmayerovo, or for instance in ArtMap, where it's one of the bestsellers this spring. And thanks.
Hurry up because it's getting sold out quick, like the English one, and then very expensive. This is an investment. Buy two. Yeah, trust my words. Really, this I can guarantee, more or less.
Okay. Thank you, both of you. Thanks to Katarína. Thanks to other people who made it possible, like Josef Řídkým, who helped us a lot with the translation, or David Böhm, who made the lettering, and of course, Foundation for Contemporary Art that made it also possible for us to publish.
Also FaVU.
And FaVU.
Also part of the budget money. So Faculty of Fine Arts in Brno.
Yeah. Okay. It seems like this is everything from ourselves, and I hope this will just spark an engagement that can continue, and we can talk. Maybe someday in the streets, maybe in the classrooms, maybe we can meet in Prague. And because the book really is about engagement, about the dialogue, not only between thinking and drawing. So I hope we all will have the opportunity to actually talk in person in better times.
So
Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you very much for joining.
Thank you.